And on that note, I'd like to welcome Dr. Andrew Neville, partner and chief economist at PwC Nigeria, who will be speaking on the enabling environment for financial services institutions in Nigeria under AFTA. Welcome, Dr. Neville.
Thank you so much, Ebenezer, and just sort of great thank you to the organizers of today's conference, the Nigerian Economic Outlook. I've really enjoyed myself today. Let me also say, you know, just it is a real honor to share the platform with Access Bank and with dear friend Dr. Fofak from Afro-Exim Bank. They're both wonderful clients of ours. And also let me pay tribute to Afro-Exim Bank's incredible efforts under Dr. Arama, Professor Arama, over the last few years for the integration of the African economy and the moving forward of it. They have been working on this very hard, as Dr. Fofak said. So it's really an honor to be here. Let me make a few remarks on the topic at hand about the financial services under AFCFTA. And let me start by maybe going back a little bit in kind of the reason why this is such a good thing for Africa to be doing. It is a mathematical impossibility for Africa to be prosperous unless Africans trade with Africans. And the reason for it is if Africans trade raw materials with the outside world and Africans become a larger percentage of the global population, and the raw materials are only worth about 5% of the value added of finished products, it means that Africa will only have 5% of the global GDP in rough terms. But of course, African population, people are aware we have 1.2 billion Africans. It's going to 3 billion Africans over the rest of the century. There is essentially no demographic growth outside of Africa in terms of children, in terms of working age adults. All of that growth is happening here. So if we just export raw materials to the rest of the world, Africa won't be prosperous. Now you might say, well, why can't Africa export finished goods to the rest of the world? And that's a good question. The problem with that is a couple of things. One is that who are you going to export to? In Europe, the population is shrinking, the market is shrinking. So by exporting to these countries requires displacing people who are already in those markets, which is not simple. Would we export to India? Perhaps. Would we export to China? That's more difficult to see. So at the end of the day, the only people we can really export higher value added goods to are other Africans. And that's why we have been at PwC so supportive of AFCFTA right from the conception of it. And it's fantastic to see it come into place, but there's no choice. And we understand all of the kind of difficulties in implementation, all the issues that have been raised today, rules of origin, customs procedures, et cetera. But at the end of the day, there will not be a prosperous Africa without a single market. The other thing that, of course, is critical, and I think Francis said this very well a little earlier today, is this is a long-term project. People need to remember that it was, comes out of African Union 2063, so a 50-year program. And if we compare it to other markets, for example, the EU essentially started in the 1950s. It had the major step forward in 1992. It had the common currency about a little over a decade later. I mean, these are long-term projects to get the kind of economic and social benefits. And of course, in the case of Europe, it was coming out of the worst, the Second World War, which had the more deaths than anything else ever in human history. And it's been a fantastically successful project to bring together 28 countries, now, of course, 27. But it's no different in my home country in Canada. We originally had the Auto Pact with the United States in 1960s. We then had a free trade agreement with Mexico and the United States in 1989, I believe, or 1990. And it's taken decades to fully bring it to fruition and to bring all the benefits of it to it. So I urge all of us to remember, even that we're right at the beginning of this, and it's going to evolve and shape. I think one of the things that Dr. Fofak said very well, it will shape the way trade and investment and people flows, goods flow, services flow throughout the continent over time on that. So let's not look at day one. Let's look at this 10 years from now when we look back on that. Now, one thing that's come up, we spent a lot of today talking about some of the barriers to manufacturing in the AFCFTA. And I think that, of course, this panel is on financial services. I think it's important to remember that services are about 2/3 of the global economy. And people, when you tend to think of trade, you think of investment, you tend to think of physical goods. But the truth is, over time, the share of physical goods in our GDP has been shrinking. In fact, even measuring it is not simple. I mean, things have higher and higher value added because of the brain power that comes in it on that. And I think that's something we need to remember with AFCFTA. And of course, it was mentioned a little earlier today that Nigeria's largest export is oil. Of course, our position is that's actually not accurate. Nigeria's largest export Nigeria, what's holding up the economy is the diaspora. So the way we express that is that Nigeria's largest export is in fact brains on that. And the diaspora remits 25 billion just in official terms. We know the unofficial number is very much larger. And the reason that that's important as we consider this is, and I think my wonderful colleague Taiwo mentioned this, is when we think of this integration, we should also be thinking beyond manufacturing goods. So we've had things like Nollywood, outsourced services, IT services, all of those things. And in a way, in Nigeria's situation, and I appreciate all the challenges for my friends at MAN and LCCI, but the comparative advantage, the term Taiwo used, is actually today sitting in services. So it's exporting IT, exporting Nollywood, exporting financial services to the world and also to the rest of the Africa in this context on that. And that's where Nigeria is strongest. And just to give an example, I said that the diaspora is holding up the economy, but the reality is that we can export Nigerian brains without people leaving Nigeria. So let me give an example of this. There's an amazing woman, Amal Hassan, who founded a company called Outsource Global. It has 1,000 seats, 1,000 employees in northern Nigeria, which employ university graduates, and they have outsourced tasks from multinationals, from global companies. So earlier we were discussing integration of global supply chain. These 1,000 people are integrated in that global supply chain. They sit in northern Nigeria. They do BPO tasks, legal tasks, call center tasks very successfully. They are earning foreign exchange for Nigeria on that. So you can export Nigerian brains without physically leaving Nigeria. And I think that's the context I'd like to bring to this conversation, because as we've already said in financial services, in fact, Nigeria is a continental leader on that. I mean, we look at Access, of course, it's an obvious example with their footprint that they've been putting out. UBA with their footprint that they've been putting out. We have fintechs. InterSwitch is Africa's greatest fintech. I mean, it was Mitchell who started it. I mean, it was a fintech before we used fintech. They've gone across Africa. Even Paga, which is a more recent fintech, Tayo has done extremely well on that. GTB is going across Africa. Of course, EcoBank we think of as based in Lome, and that's true. But in many ways, its biggest footprint is in Nigeria. So we are already seeing incredible success of Nigerian financial institutions going across the continent. And of course, as we get increasing, as Dr. Fofak said, as we get increasing incomes per capita across the whole region and more prosperous across Africa, it means that people are going to need more financial services. And there are a few key components of that. There's obviously the payments infrastructure, and it's very critical. Dr. Fofak mentioned this, but it's very critical that we build a robust payment infrastructure. Afrexim is on the front, leading the charge on that. In particular, one aspect of that payment infrastructure is to get the US dollar out of the trading system in Africa. It is extremely costly to us. He mentioned shortage of dollars creates trade problems. When Africans are trading with Africans, they need to be using local currencies, or they need to be using some sort of basket of currency on that. And it's absolutely critical if we're going to grow the whole economy and financial services that we do that. We also need mechanisms for investment flows, investment repatriation. So the system is not going to work for financial systems or the African economy as a whole if we have barriers to investment flows around the continent. We want Africans to be investing in other countries in Africa on that. And then the other aspect to that, of course, is, we need to also have to do this some technological innovation. So there's many things. I mean, we have the concept of leapfrogging in Africa. It's something that in all areas, but particularly in financial services, I think Africa should be thinking about. As we move to the integration of financial services, we bring in the unbanked, the financially excluded. we're trying to bring in these payment systems across that. We need to be looking for technologies that are going to make it simpler, bring down the costs, increase the resilience of these sorts of systems. So particularly some of these blockchain technologies, digital assets. I don't want to use the term crypto assets. That's may have a negative connotation, but legitimate digital assets built on blockchain technology that can be moved from person to person, from organization to organization in a traceable but very low cost and efficient manner on that. So from that viewpoint, we really see the service industry as a whole and the financial industry in particular as the one area where Nigeria clearly has a comparative advantage. We all understand the physical infrastructure constraints in Nigeria. We understand the power constraints. We understand the port constraints. We understand some of the customs constraints, but services don't suffer from these issues. We can be in Nigeria and deliver these services, deliver the IT services behind it on that. So I see this as a very bright future. And of course, financial services, one of the highest value added sectors. When you look at the wealthiest places in the world, Hong Kong, Singapore, Tokyo, Beijing, London, New York, what makes them wealthy? It's because they have the largest financial centers. So I think the strategy we're putting forward for Nigeria is, our strategy is to should be to export Nigerian brains. That means exporting services around the world and across Africa under the AFCFTA. So it includes, as I said, IT services, legal services, Nollywood, all of those things, but in particular financial services. So I don't think Nigeria should be afraid of the AFCFTA. As Dr. Fofak said, he's already been doing Africa integration for a very long time at Afreximbank, Access Bank, GT Bank, UBA, just to name a few. InterSwitch, Paga have also been doing it for a long time on that. And so it's just an amazing opportunity in this area. And it's just much easier to do something that's non-physical on that. So let me stop at this stage on that. I just think, as I said, there is no question that Nigeria's comparative advantage is in financial services.
Thank you very much, Dr. Neville. Thank you. Well, you've highlighted why the continental FTA is a good thing for Nigeria and also for Africa. Very good to hear. And why export focus, or trade focus should be within Africa, rather than looking at, the focus shouldn't be trying to produce, for Europe or for America or for China, but Africa is big enough, it's a huge market. And even starting from there represents a huge opportunity. And that we should not be short-term focused, in the whole of this. In other words, whether we like it or not, don't expect to see, short-term, we shouldn't be looking at the benefits for the short term, but more for the long term. Clearly for the long term, there are obvious benefits, but there will be dislocations. There will be all kinds of initial issues at the beginning. So let's be well focused on the long-term benefits, which will derive. And also, one area that you've also mentioned, which is bringing in the financially excluded, into the financial mainstream, I think is another very, very important benefit that we'll see here. As the economies get more empowered, and consumer spending increase, you see more people migrate, from being financially excluded into the financial mainstream. Very important point. But the one that I will hold, also the most is the fact that our biggest export is actually not just oil. It's not oil, it's brains. We have Nigerians abroad who are occupying key positions in all places, all over the world. And that we should take advantage of that, and use that to consolidate the obvious competitive advantage which we already have in the financial services sector. I know that Access Bank, for instance, has just bought a bank in South Africa. They are also in so many other parts of Africa. UBA is all over Africa, EcoBank, First Bank, GT Bank. So really, that is one clear area of competitive advantage, and this is an opportunity for Nigeria to capitalize on that and use that to further export brains. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this interesting